A Madman's Manuscript by Charles Dickens. Excerpt from Chapter 11 of the Pickwick Papers. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information and to learn how to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. It was past 11 o'clock, a late hour for the little village of Cobham, when Mr. Pickwick retired to the bedroom which had been prepared for his reception. He threw open the lattice window, and setting his light upon the table, fell into a train of meditation on the hurried events of the 2 preceding days. The hour and the place were both favourable to contemplation. Mr. Pickwick was roused by the church clock striking 12. The first stroke of the hour sounded solemnly in his ear, but when the bell ceased the stillness seemed insupportable. He almost felt as if he had lost a companion. He was nervous and excited, and hastily undressing himself and placing his light in the chimney, got into bed. Everyone has experienced that disagreeable state of mind in which a sensation of bodily weariness in vain contends against an inability to sleep. It was Mr. Pickwick's condition at this moment. He tossed first on one side and then on the other, and perseveringly closed his eyes, as if to coax himself to slumber. It was of no use. Whether it was the unwonted exertion he had undergone, or the heat, or the brandy and water, or the strange bed, whatever it was, his thoughts kept reverting very uncomfortably to the grim pictures downstairs, and the old stories to which they had given rise in the course of the evening. After half an hour's tumbling about, he came to the unsatisfactory conclusion that it was of no use trying to sleep. So he got up and partially dressed himself. Anything, he thought, was better than lying there, fancying all kinds of horrors. He looked out the window. It was very dark. He walked about the room. It was very lonely. He had taken a few turns from the door to the window and from the window to the door when the clergyman's manuscript for the first time entered his head. It was a good thought. If it failed to interest him, it might send him to sleep. He took it from his coat pocket, and drawing a small table towards his bedside, trimmed the light, put on his spectacles, and composed himself to read. It was a strange handwriting, and the paper was much soiled and blotted. The title gave him a sudden start, too, and he could not avoid casting a wistful glance round the room, reflecting on the absurdity of giving way to such feelings. However, he trimmed the light again and read as follows: A Madman's Manuscript. Yes, a madman's. How that word would have struck my heart many years ago! How it would have roused the terror that used to come upon me sometimes, sending the blood hissing and tingling through my veins, till the cold dew of fear stood in large drops upon my skin, and my knees knocked together with fright. I like it now, though. It's a fine name. Show me the monarch whose angry frown was ever feared like the glare of a madman's eye, whose cord and axe were ever half so sure as a madman's gripe. Oh, it's a grand thing to be mad, to be peeped at like a wild lion through the iron bars, to gnash one's teeth and howl through the long, still night to the merry ring of a heavy chain, and to roll and twine among the straw, transported with such brave music. Hurrah for the madhouse! It's a rare place. I remember days when I was afraid of being mad, when I used to start from my sleep and fall upon my knees and pray to be spared from the curse of my race, when I rushed from the sight of merriment or happiness to hide myself in some lonely place, and spend the weary hours in watching the progress of the fever that was to consume my brain. I knew the madness was mixed up with my very blood and the marrow of my bones, that one generation had passed away without the pestilence appearing among them, and that I was the first in whom it would revive. I knew it must be so, that so it always has been, and so ever would be. And when I cowered in some obscure corner of a crowded room, and saw men whisper and point and turn their eyes towards me, I knew they were telling each other of the doomed madman, and I slunk away again to mope in solitude. I did this for years, long, long years they were. The nights here are long sometimes, very long, but they are nothing to the restless nights and dreadful dreams I had at that time. It makes me cold to remember them. Largely dusky forms, with sly and jeering faces, crouched in the corners of the room, and bent over my bed at night, tempting me to madness. They told me in low whispers that the floor of the old house in which my father died was stained with his own blood, shed by his own hand in raging madness. I drove my fingers into my ears, but they screamed into my head till the room rang with it. That in one generation before him the madness slumbered, but that his grandfather had lived for years with his hands fettered to the ground to prevent his tearing himself to pieces. I knew they told the truth. I knew it well. I had found it out years before, though they had tried to keep it from me. I was too cunning for them, madman as they thought me. At last it came upon me, and I wondered how I could ever have feared it. I could go into the world now and laugh and shout with the best among them. I knew I was mad, but they did not even suspect it. How I used to hug myself with delight when I thought of the fine trick I was playing on them after their old pointing and leering, when I was not mad, but only dreading that I might one day become so. And how I used to laugh for joy when I was alone, and thought how well I kept my secret, and how quickly my kind friends would have fallen from me if they had known the truth. I could have screamed with ecstasy when I dined alone with some fine roaring fellow. To think how pale he would have turned, and how fast he would have run if he had known that the dear friend who sat close to him, sharpening a bright glittering knife, was a madman with all the power and half the will to plunge it in his heart. It was a merry life. Riches became mine, wealth poured upon me, and I rioted in pleasures enhanced 1,000-fold to me by the consciousness of my well-kept secret. I inherited an estate. The law, the eagle-eyed law itself, had been deceived, and had handed over disputed thousands to a madman's hands. Where was the wit of sharp-sighted men of sound mind? Where the dexterity of the lawyers, eager to discover a flaw? The madman's cunning had overreached them all. I had money. How I courted! I spent it profusely. How I was praised! How those 3 proud, overbearing brothers humbled themselves before me! The old white-haired father, too. Such deference, such respect, such devoted friendship. He worshipped me. The old man had a daughter, and the young men a sister, and all the 5 were poor. I was rich, and when I married the girl, I saw a smile of triumph play upon the faces of their needy relatives, as they thought of their well-planned scheme and their fine prize. It was for me to smile, to laugh outright, and tear my hair, and roll upon the ground with shrieks of merriment. They little thought they had married her to a madman. Stay, if they had known it, would they have saved her? A sister's happiness against her husband's gold, the lightest feather I blow into the air against the gay chain that ornaments my body. In one thing I was deceived with all my cunning. If I had not been mad, for though we madmen are sharp-witted enough, we get bewildered sometimes. I should have known that the girl would rather have been placed, stiff and cold, in a dull leaden coffin than borne an envied bride to my rich, glittering house. I should have known that her heart was with the dark-eyed boy whose name I once heard her breathe in her troubled sleep, and that she had been sacrificed to me to relieve the poverty of the old white-headed man and the haughty brothers. I don't remember forms of faces now, but I know the girl was beautiful. I know she was, for in the bright moonlight nights, when I start up from my sleep, and all is quiet about me, I see, standing still and motionless in one corner of this cell, a slight and wasted figure with long black hair, which, streaming down her back, stirs with no earthly wind, and eyes that fix their gaze on me, and never wink or close. Hush! The blood chills at my heart as I write it down. That form is hers. The face is very pale, and the eyes are glassy bright, but I know them well. That figure never moves. It never frowns and mouths, as others do that fill this place sometimes. But it is much more dreadful to me even than the spirits that tempted me many years ago. It comes fresh from the grave, and it is so very death-like. For nearly a year I saw that face grow paler. For nearly a year I saw the tears steal down the mournful cheeks, and never knew the cause. I found it out at last, though. They could not keep her from me long. She had never liked me. I had never thought she did. She despised my wealth and hated the splendor in which she lived. But I had not expected that. She loved another. This I had never thought of. Strange feelings came over me, and thoughts, forced upon me by some secret power, whirled round and round my brain. I did not hate her, though I hated the boy she still wept for. I pitied, yes, I pitied, the wretched life to which her cold and selfish relations had doomed her. I knew that she could not live long, but the thought that before her death she might give birth to some ill-fated being, destined to hand down madness to its offspring, determined me. I resolved to kill her. For many weeks I thought of poison, and then of drowning, and then of fire. A fine sight, the grand house in flames, and the madman's wife smouldering away to cinders. Think of the jest of a large reward, too, and of some sane man swinging in the wind for a deed he never did, and all through a madman's cunning. I thought often of this, but I gave it up at last. Oh, the pleasure of stropping the razor day after day, feeling the sharp edge, and thinking of the gash one stroke of its thin bright edge would make. Ah, at last the old spirit, who had been with me so often before, whispered in my ear that the time was come, and thrust the open razor into my hand. I grasped it firmly, rose softly from the bed, and leaned over my sleeping wife. Her face was buried in her hands. I withdrew them softly, and they fell listlessly on her bosom. She had been weeping, for the traces of the tears were still wet upon her cheek. Her face was calm and placid, and even as I looked upon it, a tranquil smile lighted up her pale features. I laid my hand softly on her shoulder. She started. It was only a passing dream. I leaned forward again. She screamed and woke. One motion of my hand, and she would never again have uttered a cry or sound. But I was startled and drew back. Her eyes were fixed on mine. I knew not how it was, but they cowed and frightened me, and I quailed beneath them. She rose from the bed, still gazing fixedly and steadily on me. I trembled, The razor was in my hand, but I could not move. She made towards the door. As she neared it, she turned and withdrew her eyes from my face. The spell was broken. I bounded forward and clutched her by the arm. Uttering shriek upon shriek, she sank upon the ground. Now I could have killed her without a struggle, but the house was alarmed. I heard the tread of footsteps on the stairs. I replaced the razor in its usual drawer, unfastened the door, and called loudly for assistance. They came and raised her, and placed her on the bed. She lay bereft of animation for hours, and when life, look, and speech returned, her senses had deserted her, and she raved wildly and furiously. Doctors were called in, great men who rolled up to my door in easy carriages, with fine horses and gaudy servants. They were at her bedside for weeks. They had a great meeting and consulted together in low and solemn voices in another room. One, cleverest and most celebrated among them, took me aside, and bidding me prepare for the worst, told me, the madman, that my wife was mad. He stood close beside me at an open window, his eyes looking in my face, and his hand laid upon my arm. With one effort I could have hurled him into the street beneath. It would have been rare sport to have done it, but my secret was at stake, and I let him go. A few days after, they told me I must place her under some restraint. I must provide a keeper for her. I went into the open fields where none could hear me, and laughed till the air resounded with my shouts. She died next day. The white-headed old man followed her to the grave, and the proud brothers dropped a tear over the insensible corpse of her whose sufferings they had regarded in her lifetime with muscles of iron. All this was food for my secret mirth, and I laughed behind the white handkerchief which I held upon my face as we rode home, till the tears came to my eyes. But though I had carried my object and killed her, I was restless and disturbed, and I felt that before long my secret must be known. I could not hide the wild mirth and joy which boiled within me, and made me, when I was alone at home, jump up and beat my hands together, and dance round and round, and roar aloud. When I went out and saw the busy crowds hurrying about the streets or to the theatre, and heard the sound of music, and beheld the people dancing, I felt such glee that I should have rushed among them, and torn them to pieces limb from limb, and howled in transport. But I ground my teeth, and struck my feet upon the floor, and drove my sharp nails into my hands. I kept it down, and no one knew I was a madman. Yet I remember, though it's one of the last things I can remember, for now I mix my realities with my dreams, and having so much to do, and being always hurried here, have no time to separate the two, from some strange confusion in which they get involved. I remember how I let it out at last. Ha, ha! I think I see their frightened looks now, and feel the ease with which I flung them from me, and dashed my clenching fists into their white faces, and then flew like the wind, and left them screaming and shouting far behind. The strength of a giant comes upon me when I think of it. There, see how this iron bar bends beneath my furious wrench. I could snap it like a twig, only there are long galleries here with many doors. I don't think I could find my way along them, and even if I could, I know there are iron gates below which they keep locked and barred. They know what a clever madman I have been, and they are proud to have me here to show. Let me see. Yes, I had it out. It was late at night when I reached home, and found the proudest of the three proud brothers waiting to see me. Urgent business, they said. I recollect it well. I hated the man with all a madman's hate. Many and many a time had my fingers longed to tear him. They told me he was there. I ran swiftly upstairs. He had a word to say to me. I dismissed the servants. It was late, and we were alone together for the first time. I kept my eyes carefully from him at first, for I knew what he little thought, and I gloried in the knowledge that the light of madness gleamed from them like fire. We sat in silence for a few minutes. He spoke at last. My recent dissipation and strange remarks, made so soon after his sister's death, were an insult to her memory. Coupling together many circumstances which had first escaped his observation, he thought I had not treated her well. He wished to know whether he was right in inferring that I meant to cast a reproach upon her memory, and a disrespect upon her family. It was due to the uniform he wore to demand this explanation. This man had a commission in the army, a commission purchased with my money and his sister's misery. This was the man who had been foremost in the plot to ensnare me and grasp my wealth. This was the man who had been the main instrument in forcing his sisters to wed me, well knowing that her heart was given to that puling boy, due to his uniform, the livery of his degradation. I turned my eyes upon him. I could not help it. But I spoke not a word. I saw the sudden change that came upon him beneath my gaze. He was a bold man, but the color faded from his face, and he drew back his chair. I dragged mine nearer to him, and I laughed. I was very merry then. I saw him shudder. I felt the madness rising within me. He was afraid of me. "You were very fond of your sister when she was alive," I said. "Very." He looked uneasily round him, and I saw his hand grasp the back of his chair. But he said nothing. "You villain!" I said. "I found you out. I discovered your hellish plots against me. I know her heart was fixed on someone else before you compelled her to marry me. I know it, I know it." He jumped suddenly from his chair, brandished it aloft, and bid me stand back, for I took care to be getting closer to him all the time I spoke. I screamed rather than talked, for I felt tumultuous passion eddying through my veins, and the old spirits whispering and taming me to tear his heart out. "Damn you!" said I, starting up and rushing upon him. "I killed her! I am a madman! Down with you! Blood! Blood! I will have it!" I turned aside with one blow the chair he hurled at me in his terror. I closed with him, and with a heavy crash we rolled upon the floor together. It was a fine struggle, that, for he was a tall, strong man fighting for his life, and I, a powerful madman, thirsting to destroy him. I knew no strength could equal mine, and I was right. Right again, though a madman. His struggles grew fainter. I knelt upon his chest and clasped his brawny throat firmly with both hands. His face grew purple, his eyes were starting from his head, and with protruded tongue he seemed to mock me. I seized the tighter. The door was suddenly burst open with a loud noise, and a crowd of people rushed forward, crying aloud to each other to secure the madman. My secret was out, and my only struggle now was for liberty and freedom. I gained my feet before a hand was on me, threw myself upon my assailants, and cleared my way with my strong arm, as if I bore a hatchet in my hand, and hewed them down before me. I gained the door, dropped over the banister, and in an instant was in the street. Straight and swift I ran, and no one dared to stop me. I heard the noise of the feet behind and redoubled my speed. It grew fainter and fainter in the distance, and at length died away altogether. But on I bounded through marsh and rivulet, over fence and wall, with a wild shout which was taken up by the strange beings that flocked around me on every side, and swelled the sound till it pierced the air. I was borne upon the arms of demons who swept along upon the wind, and bore down bank and hedge before them, and spun me round and round with a rustle and a speed that made my head spin, until at last they threw me from them with a violent shock, and I fell heavily upon the earth. When I awoke, I found myself here, in this grey cell, where the sunlight seldom comes, and the moon steals in rays which only serve to show the dark shadows about me, and that silent figure in its old corner. When I lie awake, I can sometimes hear strange shrieks and cries from distant parts of this large place. What are they, I know not, but they never come from that pale form, nor does it regard them, for from the first shades of dusk till the earliest light of morning, it still stands motionless in the same place, listening to the music of my iron chair, and watching my gambols on my straw bed. At the end of the manuscript was written in another hand this note: The unhappy man whose ravings were recorded above was a melancholy instance of the baneful results of energies misdirected in early life, and excesses prolonged until their consequences could never be repaired. The thoughtless riot, dissipation, and debauchery of his younger days produced fever and delirium. The first effects of the latter was the strange delusion, founded upon a well-known medical theory, strongly contended for by some, and as strongly contested by others, that an hereditary madness existed in his family. This produced a settled gloom, which in time developed a morbid insanity, and finally terminated in raving madness. There is every reason to believe that the events he detailed, though distorted in the description of his diseased imagination, really happened. It was only matter of wonder to those who were acquainted with the vices of his early career, that his passions, when no longer controlled by reason, did not lead him to the commission of still more frightful deeds. Mr. Pickwick's candle was just expiring in the socket as he concluded the perusal of the old clergyman's manuscript, and when the light went suddenly out, without any previous flicker by way of warning, it communicated a very considerable start to his excited frame. Hastily throwing off such articles of clothing as he had put on when he rose from his uneasy bed, and casting a fearful glance around, he once more scrambled hastily between the sheets, and soon fell fast asleep. End of A Madman's Manuscript by Charles Dickens.